Welcome to an emergency first episode of Prod Rants. I wanted to talk about the announcement that was made yesterday about the MRQs being canceled for the Starladder Budapest Major and what I think it does to the scene and to the VRS, and bring up an option that I thought about back when the Major Copenhagen happened. So I wanted to point out the statement that was made yesterday, announced by Starladder and Valve, that the MRQs will be canceled and that 32 teams will get direct invites to the major in Budapest based on Valve regional standings. And Valve added a message to this saying, one of our goals of the VRS is to standardize community events so that they can be integrated with the majors. At this point, we believe that a separate qualification process for the major is both unnecessary and disruptive. So I agree with them saying it's disruptive, especially because these MRQs were going to disrupt 3 separate events that were announced in line with Valve's own tournament organizer rules, and Valve just doesn't follow that. So the MRQs were essentially going to ruin those 3 events that mainly were going to consist of teams that would have been at MRQs. I think this was added recently. We support this change and believe that every official ranking tournament will be even more important and will lead to a more consistent tournament schedule. I mean, it will lead to a more consistent tournament schedule, that's for sure. So we're going to bring in the HLTV article and figure out the lands that were being disrupted by the MRQ were the CS Asia Championships, Thunderpick World Championship, and Mesa Nomadic Masters Fall that were all happening between the dates of October 16th and 19th. I also wanted to bring up another one of the changes, which was the Stewie 2K rule, where Valve essentially made it so that, or made it like law that you can't use a stand-in to change the nationality of your like main roster. Your nationality will be set with the roster that you, I guess, sign up for tournaments with, rather than the lineup that you bring to said tournament. And this kind of screws over Sonic, who has been living in America since like 2015, 2016, and has been, as he puts in his tweet, he's held residency in this region. He's went to university here. He's lived in a region and paid taxes in a region for almost a decade, and there's no like ruling for him to claim to be part of this region. Like, even in his bio, he has a South Africa flag and a Canadian flag. There needs to be some sort of rules in place for players like Sonic to have a way forward where they can claim a region other than their own. Especially because right now, Sonic technically screws over Wildcard. And if he joins any other, like, half American, half other region team, he screws over their distribution as well. For Wildcard right now, it's 2 Euros, 2 Americans, and then technically I believe, Asian, because South Africa would be considered part of the Middle East. And because of that, his team is 50-50 different regions, specifically Europe and America, and because of that, they will have to qualify to the Budapest Major via European qualification means and European VRS, because they have a equal amount of different regions, and The tiebreaker for that is whatever region has more major slots, which will almost 100% be Europe at this point. So prepare for a flashbang here, but I wanted to talk about my own solution to this problem, which was a solution that I was thinking about back when we still had RMRs. And it was mainly just a solution to fix smaller regions' RMRs and help bolster those scenes after COVID kind of pushed them down even more than they were already down. So here's the flashbang. And it's a world major ranking. So it's a 64 team event split into 4 groups of 16, where the distribution is 32 European teams, 16 American teams, or America's teams, and then 8 Asia Pacific teams, and then 8 teams determined by the Legends stage of the previous major. So what it would look like for Austin is these are the 32 European teams, including ones that got directly invited to the major, and then 16 America's teams, 8 Asia Pacific teams, and then these extra teams because last major, Europe got 6 teams in playoffs, America's got 1, and Asia got 1. And I think this is already a better system because all of these teams, even including like European teams, get to battle it out for spots at the major that they weren't even possible with MRQs, and definitely wouldn't be possible with the like new system going forward where teams just automatically get invited. So, like, what I mean by that is these are the teams that would have been invited directly to the major instead of having MRQs. For Asia, Rare Atom, the Huns, Atox, and Semper Fi. All 4 of those teams did not make it out of their respective Asia qualifier. The 3 teams that made it out of the qualifiers were Chinggis Warriors, Tyloo, FlyQuest. Like, we can't be making a change like this when there's direct examples of both teams that would not have been invited placing so well at the major and teams that would have been invited not even making the tournament. Like, America's is probably the closest to what like an ideal system would be, where of the 6 Americas teams that would be invited directly to the major of Complexity, Wildcard, Imperial, NRG, Blue Jays, and Fluxo, the only team that didn't make it was Blue Jays. For Europe, the 6 teams that would have been invited are Astralis, Gamer Legion, Saw, BC Game, Heroic, and Big. These 5 of these teams, again, did not make the major. The only team that made it was Heroic. So it just is like a massive issue with either the VRS or just how events are given to lower teams. Like, these are the teams that would not have even had a chance to make the Austin major, who are doing well at it. Bait and Namiga. Namiga is in stage 3 right now. Bestia, we don't know how well they were going to do, but the team that replaced them, Legacy, who technically wouldn't have even made it anyway. They would have been right on the fringe of a team to be invited, and then they were on the fringe to qualify via MRQs. They came in here, and they're also in Stage 3. They went 3-0 in Stage 2. Chinggis Warriors, Lin Vision, and Tyloo all wouldn't have made it because they would have been on the outside. I believe even FlyQuest. LinVision, the only reason LinVision is even LinVision technically wouldn't have even made the WMR that I'm suggesting, because the only reason they were invited to a qualifier, I believe LinVision was like 12th in Asia Pacific VRS points. The only reason they were invited was because MRQs were played online. So the Asia region was split between three separate qualifiers, all because the Asia region as like a collective is so widespread, that because it essentially includes all of Africa, all of Asia, and all of Oceania. So you need to have three separate qualifiers because of ping. You can't have a Chinese team playing a team from like South Africa. The ping would be too bad for both teams. So what these are the reasons why I think this is a better system. The major should be where the best CS is played, not the most inclusive. I'm not making a political statement by saying that. I'm just saying the most inclusive CS is a great way to determine teams in a qualifier, but it shouldn't determine teams at the event specifically. It's why I really enjoy Valve's idea of the teams that make top 8 at the previous major get like a extra slot for their region. Teams that like made stage 2 when their previous region never made stage 2 gets an extra slot for their region. I think that's a really cool idea because it fluctuates the total amount of slots per region based on how well that region is doing historically. And then this system is mainly a way to both get rid of previous America and Asia RMRs and their poor formatting. But this also allows for those regions which are historically weak, other than outlier teams like Liquid and Mongols. It allows for the weaker teams below those outliers to have more time and more practice around some of the best teams in the world. It also gets rid of, for like America's RMR, they were usually a Swiss system with 16 teams. It gets rid of those regional best of ones that are complete toss ups. Like Liquid could lose to Odic, or Liquid could lose to Getting Info, which was like a mixed team that got 14th in North America VRS, or not even just North America, just America's VRS. It adds I added an extra 8 slots, which are right here, because it added up perfectly to 64, because Asia as a region, going past like 10 teams in Asia gets a little iffy about if the teams are even still, like, if they even can still hold together a roster. So how would this be possible, and why would this matter? So I mainly did this because back during COVID, non-European regions, specifically America, struggled financially and performance-wise due to how Eurocentric CS had become. Even during like COVID, and there were still like countermeasures and stuff like that, you essentially, as a American team, had to be in Europe full time, which led to a lack of good practice at home for the teams that can't go to Europe full time, and the teams that were at events constantly competing with the best teams were also gone. There was no good teams to scrim against back in like the Americas. or if your org is struggling financially, these WMRs are Valve sanctioned events, meaning that Valve or the tournament organizer covers all of the expenses of the team. So even if you're a team without an org, even if you're a team whose org can't afford to send you to Europe for 3 weeks just a boot camp, you get, 2 to 3 weeks playing this event where you're surrounded by the best teams in the world and you can scrim and you have your hotel rooms covered, you have your flights covered. Like, you have plenty of time here. It's essentially a free boot camp. Like, outside of the 1 week where your group is playing, it's essentially a free boot camp. Another problem with the new system, other than what I was pointing out up here, is that inviting based on rankings leads to us missing out on large moments in the community. And I mean, like, times when teams missed out on the major either for the first time, or teams like crumbled under the pressure of needing to make the major. Some examples of this are G2 missing the Rio major, Nip or Astralis both missing a major for the first time. All of those happened at either RMRs or regional qualifiers. These moments were massive. The closest thing we have to it now was Falcons going 1-3 in stage 2. But it doesn't have the same impact because Falcons made the major, they got their sticker money. Like, the biggest point, and it was brought up by Nikodas in one of his tweets regarding MRQs being canceled, was that RMRs were some of the most exciting and important events. They were the most exciting to watch other than the major, because you were watching teams that were like fighting tooth and nail, putting everything on the line to make the major, to get that sticker money, because that sticker money could keep their org on its feet for another year and keep their paychecks coming. And it would start this sense of, like, the underdog teams have a chance. The underdog teams are very good. Players on the underdog teams are, like, on the same level as even, like, top 10 teams, top 5 teams even. And a lot of these, like, teams that come out of nowhere, you can think of, like, Into the Breach, Apex, Gamer Legion, like, during the all three of those teams during the Paris major. You take players from those teams, and like, players from all those teams go to, like, Na'Vi, and they win a major, like, a year later. Like, these players were good enough already. They just needed an org to not even take a chance on them. They just needed an org or a tournament where they could show that they are ready for tier 1. And these are, like, moments that won't happen if teams are just invited. This also wouldn't be an online event. This would be a LAN event. So it gets rid of the need to, like, split regions and have, like, weird rulings about which region gets more invite slots and stuff like that. Main example of this was the China qualifier had 2 major slots because of a weird ruling where, like, because Mongols had the direct invite, their region doesn't matter, and it becomes the second place Valve rankings in Asia. Whatever regional qualifier they are participating in gets a second chance at the major. Which is funny because that was Rare Atom. Rare Atom had 2 chances to qualify for the major, and they missed both. So how this would be done, it would be a all best of 3 Swiss system groups with Buchholz score, but it would be the same original seeding that we do right now for rounds 1 and 2. So the 1 seed would play the 9 seed, and so on and so forth. And then round 2, the highest seed that's 1-0 would play the lowest, or the highest seed that's 1-0 would play the lowest seed that's 1-0, like how it is currently. Teams that go 3-0 would get the equivalent of legend spots and would get the 8 direct invites to stage 3. The 3-1 teams would qualify for the major, but the 4 either lowest Buchholz score or the 4 lowest Valve rankings once the major is coming would drop to stage 1. And then the 3 and 2 teams would either all go to stage 1, and that would be your 3 stages and your 8 invites per stage. Or if you want to go back to the 24 team system that we used previously, the 3 and 2 teams could have a wild card for the last 4 slots and then go back to 24 teams. However, this wild card would have to happen before the major probably at the same venue as the major, which is essentially just like how the major is now. So it's probably just better to do it like how it is now with 32 teams, because we'd have to delay the matches anyway, because Group A's 3-2 teams shouldn't have to sit at this event for like 3 weeks. And then they also get like a significantly larger time to prep and practice for their wildcard opponents, because the WMR would last 4 weeks straight, pretty much each group taking about 5 days, because it's all best of 3s. So rounds 1 and 2 have to be separated instead of being played together. So here's some cons that I thought of and my rebuttal to these cons. This makes the game even more EU centric. I think this is true, but it also is a long-term solution to the problem of that these regions that are weaker get more time in Europe and they get more practice, and the like weaker teams that have good players, like for example M80 with Malbs, this gives a stage for Malbs to show that he's good enough to then get picked up by a G2. The other example I have is that this can be fixed by having the WMR hosted in a different region than the major, but I think that would be a visa hell, and it would probably just be easier to have the WMR in the same country as the major, maybe even like 2 months beforehand, so that there's plenty of time for teams to get a visa for the major. And it should give teams that maybe had visa issues for the WMR time for the missing player to get their visa for the major. Some problems is that it might cost more for Valve to fly out all of these 64 teams to one location rather than 3 separate tournament venues and 3 separate like hotel costs for when we had RMRs. It was almost the same amount of players or teams. It was 56 teams versus 64. But now they're all in one place instead of all separate. But if you want, you could have a crowd and then only show, like, have a crowd from days 3 through 5. So rounds 3 through 5, and then only show on stage matches that like are qualification matches for the major, and then have like a second screen showing elimination matches. That could recoup some costs, but it also could increase costs because you have to do a stage LAN instead of a studio LAN. The main issue I see with this is that it could lead to a major with only European teams. I personally think this was more of a problem when there was only 24 teams. I don't think it could really happen when you invite 38 European teams and 32 of them have to beat out the best of every other region. But I would personally argue that I would rather have a major with, like, 23 European teams, because they're the best 23 teams that are like those are the best 23 teams possible, rather than like a major of 23 good teams and then 9 really bad teams that got invites because their region has like no Valve ranking events. So one team that overperformed once at this event like could kind of skirt responsibilities for the almost rest of the season just because they placed well at one event of like maybe 3 or 4 the entire year, which keeps them within the top like 16 in Americas, or within the top 8 in Asia. It just becomes a massive issue. I mean, especially when you look at the teams that would have been directly invited for like Europe and Asia. A lot of these teams didn't even qualify through the MRQs. And then this would also be another reason, is the long-term solution is that this can lead to a drastic improvement of weaker regions, because 8 or more teams get to be better and get to improve and be in Europe or be wherever the major is and where all the good teams are, to practice for like 2 weeks guaranteed. And it doesn't matter about like if your org has the money to send you there. It doesn't matter at all. Which will then hopefully either lead to weaker teams in that region getting better, or it will at least give a stage for maybe a player on a team like Getting Info showing up really well in the matches they have, and then they get picked up by either like an M80 or by like a Complexity, and then they get more chances on the global stage to play and grow and improve. Even if it's just some players improving, I think it's an important way to kind of build back these regions that COVID kind of killed, where tournaments were still constantly happening in Europe. So the teams and the meta evolved in Europe still, where it kind of stagnated in Americas, and we lost a lot of players in both regions to Valorant. Like most of tier like 1.5 to tier 2 North Americans went to Valorant. It was easier to compete. You could be competing for trophies like almost immediately, even if you were a tier 2 NA player. And you were getting paid like not tier 1 money, but significantly more than tier 2 money, just for kind of really rudimentary and baseline effort. So it kind of gave way to people going, well, do I need money right now because I haven't been making money in CS, or do I want to keep pursuing CS, where the like path for me to grow isn't very good? And obviously, I think the obvious choice was Valorant at the time. Now, not so much. But I think that's why we have players like Lake, players like Nyx, players like CXZI who are on Complexity and M80 that are growing. It's why in North America at least, and in South America, these teams are bringing in these young talents, or like taking good talents from other teams and combining them into like super teams, or like quote unquote super teams that then go out and have better results. And then finally, this would remove the incentive for gaining more regional slots for the major. This is a thing that I really liked about both the major system and the RMR system, and I think it can be saved. I added here that that incentive could be added to the additional 8 slots that are added to the WMR, and these could be given one per top 8. But you could also just do it based on overall placement at the previous major. I don't know how you would do it because right now, this seeding graph right here is just kind of something I threw together. Like, there's no rhyme or reason for the number one seed from America being in Group C and the number one seed for Asia being in Group B. I just kind of threw it together because I didn't want, if I kept doing snake format, the number one seed in both America and Asia would have all been in Group A, which I didn't think was necessarily fair and would make Group A significantly stronger. But it's kind of hard to create a 64 team seeding or seeded list of teams based on regional seedings of like 3 separate regional seedings. You could do it based on Valve ranking seeding. So like a team like Mongols would potentially be like 5th or 6th overall and seed it like that. I think that's a decent idea. I mainly was using this old system because it was how teams were like split across RMRs. So like RMR A was the 1 seed and the 3 seed in Europe and like so on and so forth, essentially just like splitting the two. So the RMR B would be the 2 seed and the 4 seed. On down, essentially the A group was all odd numbered teams and the B group was all even numbered teams. And I just kind of stuck with that. I think you could do it based on like the invite dates Valve region, like the invite date global Valve ranking as the seeding, and then just do regular snake format. I think that could work. But it would have to be of the teams invited because technically, like, teams like Legacy and Sharks and Bestia, who are, bottom 10 or bottom 5 of the teams invited from Americas, would have significantly less points than, say, a lot of these European teams just because of the amount of points available in the regions. Like, if I were to look at, like, Perryvision versus Legacy, most likely Perryvision has more points than Legacy, which I think is not necessarily an issue, but it creates issues in the future. That's all I got. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think of the WMR? What do you guys think of Valve canceling MRQs? What do you think of MRQs compared to RMRs? I would have preferred just going back to RMRs. I feel like those events brought a lot of meaning. I think if you don't want to do something as complicated or as much of a logistical nightmare of having 64 teams all in the same area for roughly the same amount of time, then I think you need to just go back to RMRs. I know that takes up time in the tournament, in like the tournament schedule, that it wouldn't otherwise. Like now that it's just direct invites, you technically can squeeze another event or two in the timeline that could maybe, fix some of these issues where teams like this get invited when they shouldn't, or teams like this don't even get invited at all. I think there's one of the people in the reactions to the cancellation said it's essentially a bubble at the top. I believe Snappy said this. It's a bubble at the top that can only be burst by a team performing very poorly for multiple tournaments in a row. Whereas teams that are like at the bottom trying to get in, they also have to perform consistently well, but they also have less opportunities to be or they have less opportunities to qualify for tournaments where they can perform consistently well, which leads to this discrepancy in points where like teams like Falcons and FaZe, even though they're bottom, like they're ranked 7th and 8th in European VRS, they are still getting automatic invites to most tournaments. And even if they perform like mediocre, they will maintain enough points to not drop out of the top 10 and then not get more invites. Or it will continue to get more invites instead of dropping out of the range where they don't get an invite anymore. Bring up any more examples of like teams like this. Like obviously for this major there probably aren't any more examples, but like are there any more examples from like previous majors where like teams that would not have been directly invited to the major made it through the RMR and played perfect, like played amazingly. Obvious example would be Copenhagen Flames, or I'm looking down here at the list, Ecstatic last major. I know this is a completely different Ecstatic team, but like the Ecstatic team from last major, I believe, like came out of nowhere and did really well. Like it doesn't even have to be teams that like make the playoffs, just teams that like overperform where the community thought they were within the rankings of the tournament. But that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. I should be back with a couple other videos about like completely other stuff. I just kind of rant on this channel, but this is something that I already had like in the works since the Copenhagen major, and I kind of let it die because I didn't have the opportunity. And I wanted to do a video about this when MRQs were initially announced, but we didn't really know a lot about them when they were initially announced. But that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Peace.